Yes, welcome back again. My name is Lucius Wayne. Today I want to discuss about the origin of life. This one is a big debate that is ongoing around over the world, and we are not quite sure that, or we are not sure how life came to originate all about, or all this came to be being so that we are here today. So I'm going to attempt to explain the origins of life and what could possibly have happened in the past so that we find ourselves here. So one way to understand the terrestrial life form, how it came to be about, we have to at least go back to the building blocks of life, the core things that make up life. And when we go back in time, we have to understand how these atoms and molecules came about. And this was such a long time ago when it all started with the molecules and the atoms. So this process is not quite well understood, but at least it attempts to provide a clear roadmap on how all this started. It started millions or even billions of years back into the past, where the simplest molecules and the simplest atoms came about together to form the first single life forms that we are now seeing in our planet Earth currently. So Earth is the one which is the most habitable, and it has uh, life forms that have not yet been seen in other planets around our solar system. So there was this famous experiment that was done in 1953 by some scientists. They attempted to replicate the early atmosphere, and they put some gases inside the chamber and introduced an electric spark to try and stimulate how the early atmosphere functioned. So they put some gases such as ammonia, hydrogen, and CO2, and induced them with some electric spark. So after a few days, there were some organic chemical compounds that were formed. So for example, uh, methane, water had formed, and also some of the organic, maybe for example ammonia, and the other things were formed. So after this process was formed, the early atmosphere, or maybe the early things that came about, was really just very simple chemical compounds that formed. So the next step that formed was these chemical compounds came about. For example, the amino acids, and maybe and nitrogen and hydrogen came about to form uh, the single the simplest life forms. For example, the DNA and the RNA. So the DNA, just DNA in full, it means diribonucleic acid. So this DNA is the requirement of is the most important requirement for life. So this DNA came about into, DNA is mixes with the other building blocks to provide the first earliest proteins. And these proteins catalyze the production of nucleotides. And now these ones are the most basic building blocks of nucleic acid. So it is being debated whether RNA or DNA came about, which one was the first one. So RNA chemicals or molecules can act as catalysts, and since RNA resembles DNA, it can store genetic information up to some extent. So it is being said that the DNA and the RNA are the building blocks of life, and they happen to be the most simple life forms that were that were formed in the early universe. So after this formation of the early proteins, the encoded information in the DNA and the RNA. So it was particularly based on those simple life forms that came about. So the energy of the sunlight is being utilized by plants and some bacteria in photosynthesis, which enables the coded information or the stored information in the DNA or the RNA to act either to capture more sunlight, the production of photosynthesis, or maybe the chemical exchanges, maybe to form simple life forms or chemicals that came about. So that is what had actually happened. So also it is being debated that some of the life forms that came about also they are found nearly in the hydrothermic vents that are happening under the sea. Some scientists say that some simple organisms are formed around that area because that's where hot water and maybe, for example, hot water and the other chemical compounds that come about from the interior of the earth that came about. But others are saying that at that moment, at that moment, the conditions for life are too harsh because life cannot exist where there is hot water and all that thing. So uh, in the periods that life was just coming about to form, it formed some simple organisms, some simple as DNA structures. They encoded information inside them, and they came about to form the first proteins. After the first proteins were formed, these proteins actually had information of maybe producing, for example, in photosynthesis, they produced water and carbon dioxide, and also during the oldest science, you know, the early universe, the temperature was around, it was a bit higher, so we could not have had maybe bigger organisms or maybe animals or terrestrial animals. So the simplest life forms that are formed was just one of the oldest ones were the DNA and the RNA. So we are seeing that time is also a constant factor that enables organisms to be able to evolve from one organism to another. And other organisms that perform a specialized task came about to form an organ, and maybe an organ came about to form a group of organs, and it formed the first organism. So the first organisms are being said to be like the fishes that are found in the oceans. Our earliest ancestors, most likely, some other scientists say that they began as a fish. So, all these life forms or multicellular organisms, when we want to study where life originated, we have to first of all study the genetic code, or that is the DNA and the RNA, so that we can be able to understand how it all evolved to form the first multicellular organism, or even the single most organisms. So, basically, the relationship of living beings can be studied by comparing their genetic information. That is, like I said, the DNA and the RNA. And the more the distant the evolutionary process of each organism, the more it makes sense. And also it makes sense also to understand how they all came about. So, uh, although some of the information that have been presented, we are not quite sure whether it is true or not, but it provides somehow a real, it provides us a real roadmap where we can be able to see how life formed or evolved after millions or even billions of years until where we are right now. So that is, I mean, that is how I can attempt to explain the origin of life. So I can attempt to explain the origin of life through cosmology and astronomy. So if in any case you have some of the questions, please you can holler me and I can be able to explain for you scientifically. So make sure you subscribe to my channel and like my social media pages so that I bring for you more questions that maybe, or I attempt to answer any other questions that you have. Thank you.